because over the years, our brand has changed based on the information from our consumer. And our customer is actually 1/3 never had children. 1/3 had children a minimum of 10 years ago. We're really servicing a lot of women in the menopause space right now. And then the mothers who I thought I would be able to serve, the majority of them, to your point, until they have the baby, they don't really realize how important it is to take care of themselves. So that
Mhm.
customer shifted to like the second time or the after they had the baby mom, not somebody preparing for their first pregnancy. So that's primarily how we shifted into that. And then the fabrication, I make sure that I mill everything from scratch. I'm really involved in the process. I think a lot of people are learning a lot more about what fabrics do to your body now, and they're more mindful of that. Fabrics are, skin is our largest organ. It
Right.
consumes just as much as when we're eating. Things we put on our body, we're so mindful when we're pregnant, but then what happens when the baby comes out? Then we're like kind of back to the same routine. And we want to shift that thinking to understand like there's a lot of proof that's showing these fabrics and things that are happening are affecting women's health. They're affecting their hormones, they're affecting their fertility. So
Mhm.
that's how we kind of moved into making sure that we were really well-rounded in offering what we're doing.
Welcome to the Moxie podcast. As always, I am thrilled that you guys are part of this community and that you're here today. This whole month, we are talking about sustainability and why is it important. That's a big word. It has a lot of ambiguity to it, but we love to break it down. And I love to bring people onto the podcast that are doing it in real time, especially with their business, and just have their values all wrapped into that. So I want to welcome Nadine to the podcast. Welcome to Moxie.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I am so pumped that you're here. And so we kind of, again, this podcast I just love because it is just free form, beautiful conversations. And I just love to see where it leads to because, um, yeah, I know we have a lot of synergies and a lot of value alignment in what we look for within our own companies. And so before we even get to that, I would love for you to share with your listeners who you are. But the question that I like to pose always is what you're best known for. And yeah, however you want to answer that question.
Okay, so hi everyone. My name is Nadine Woods, and I am the founder of Mayana. We are a socially conscious intimates brand that is based out of Toronto. So we produce everything right here in our space. And we really specialize in inclusive intimates that really take care of all the different aspects of the journey of a woman's life and in motherhood to menopause is what we specialize in, and fuller cup. But our mission really is to decolonize fashion and uncensor patriarchal narratives around bodies, birth, and breastfeeding. So we're really focused on how are we having these conversations? How are we breaking down barriers? And how are we making sure that this is something that we lead in by principle and values, from how we produce everything to the message that gets across?
I love it. I love all of it. So let's backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
And how did you even really come up with the idea of like, okay, I'm gonna be in this. I want to work with intimates. I want to work with women. I want them to feel seen, loved, and heard, like all of that. Like, where did that idea spark from?
So I had a baby. And I felt like I was completely blindsided by the experience. Like we are over prepared for having the baby, the pregnancy, and sometimes the birth. I think that even is like I don't know. I feel like even after all these years, it's still kind of questionable. They're still very fear-based around birth.
For
Um,
sure.
but there's no conversation about once you have the baby, what that means for you, what that means for your life, for your identity. And for me, I went through so many changes. Like my marriage broke down immediately right after I had my daughter, which I was not expecting. I ended up staying with my mother to get some support during that time. I was living in another country, so I was fortunate enough to be around family during that time. But I came home with a brand new baby. I had a whole new body, which you know, was falsely misled that everything's just going to kind of go back to
Yeah.
potentially what it was after you have the baby. You work on it after. And then also my identity shifted. Like I was going through some major life changes at the same time, but also I just became a mom. And so many of my friends and my family members were not at that stage yet. And they didn't really know how to navigate either of the experiences I was going through. So I was really isolated. And so my identity changed as well. So I just felt like there's a lot going on. And some of the biggest pieces of me that needed support physically was what was happening to my body, my healing postpartum. So anything
Mm-hmm.
pelvic related. And then also I was breastfeeding for the first time. Who knew breasts are actually serving a function, right? And so they were out 20 times a day, all day.
Mm-hmm.
And it became like this really cumbersome process, in addition to just kind of wanting to get back into your existing clothes again, right? Like you don't want to stick in the
Right.
maternity space. There's this awful stigma, which is unfortunate, but there is. You're so deeply wanting to kind of return potentially. Some people, it's like they want to get back, like snap back, which that culture is very unhealthy and toxic. And then other people just want to feel like themselves again, whatever that
Right.
means, right? It doesn't always mean physically. So that's how I kind of went down the road of creating undergarments, because I was shocked at how much information was missing. So
Mm-hmm.
why don't women know that this happens to your pelvic floor after you have a baby? Why don't women know that, you know, breastfeeding actually is 20 to 30 times a day? It's not like 3 times a
Yeah.
day, right? Like these are little
Right.
things that we're not really thinking about when we have children. And then I'm in public. I have this god awful, hideous bra that every time I want to breastfeed, it's already daunting to breastfeed in public from a social perspective. You don't know if people are going to come up and tell you anything. And you really kind of flex that muscle over time. The more you breastfeed, it's like you get a little bit
Yeah.
stronger. Come and tell me something. I want you to, you know what I mean? But in the
Yeah.
first few stages, you're kind of feeling nervous. You need like a wing person
Mm-hmm.
there to kind of block that potentially. So many things are happening. So for me, I think one of the biggest changes was my undergarments. I started wearing my mom's underwear for the first time because I didn't have any big old underwear back then. Like I was so used to wearing like my kind of like sexier things or like
Yeah.
skimpy things with no seams. And now I need to wear a pad for 6 weeks. Nobody really talked about that. And then,
Yeah.
right. So all of that changed. And I really thought like, why aren't we having this conversation more often?
Right.
Yeah. So
Okay. That's
that's
so,
what
no, that is so good. After having 3 kids, and when I like am talking to women who are in their first pregnancy, I'm like, I just want to talk about all the things after birth because no one talks about it. And I normally like sit in the room with them and I'm like, are you ready? Are you prepared?
yeah.
Yeah. Because
Yeah.
it's true. And then there's a stigma around it. And then as well as, yeah, there feels like a lack of support there as well. So
Yeah.
um that's awesome. I find that the really, really beautiful companies, right, start from passion and just like a need of our own. And so I love to hear like the origin story of that. And so then I want to move into just the nature of how you're making the product, because I think it would have been really easy to mind that gap and go the other direction and find it made overseas and kind of not, I don't want to call it cutting corners. It's just creating, very large profit margins and seeing at the end of the day that you're, answering a call to yourself, and then, you're able to just get it produced elsewhere. But what made you decide to do it, right where your feet are, and to do it in a sustainable way? Was that always your mindset, or had you grown into that over time in your lifespan?
So it was definitely always my mindset. I have no background in fashion. So I
Hmm.
didn't know how to sew when I
That's
started.
awesome.
But it was definitely my mindset because I wasn't as aware as I am today, to be honest, but I was
Mm,
aware that fashion is one of the biggest exploitative industries in the world, and it predominantly affects women in the global south. So 80%
hmm.
of that is affecting women in the global south. So for me, that was a priority for sure. Making it in Toronto was not my intention at the beginning. Initially, I had started in another factory that was in Quebec, and I really wanted to kind of grow the brand there with people who had experience, but that didn't really turn out well. A lot of people, I think, are still jaded from the fact that made in Canada, at that time, they believed that people didn't really care about made in Canada anymore because
Mm,
the government too had facilitated offshoring production. They weren't doing anything to incentivize people to shop locally, to produce locally. So there's no benefit to the consumer to buy local goods. They
Right.
just see it as more expensive and they don't understand why. I think that's one of the things. It's almost like this misconception. Well, they just price it that way because they want to be a higher end brand. When the reality is, this is the actual cost of what it would take to make something like this. Like even economies of scale can't reduce it to what we're seeing today.
Right.
And there's the hypocrisy of everything, right? Like I can't sit here and be like, oh, I'm all for women empowerment. Meanwhile, I'm exploiting women in another country to make the product that is promoting women empowerment. Like it makes no sense. It's just such a
Right.
disconnect. So that's kind of how everything started. And then I put it out there. Wouldn't it be great to open my own space and like employ women who feel like they're in a space of belonging and they're getting treated well? Because there's also a misconception that if you are produced in the West,
Mhm.
that people are treated well, they're paid fair wages. That's also a misconception. I think a lot of people have this kind of brainwashed way of thinking that if it's made in another country that is in the global south, it's not as good quality, or those people are probably
Right.
going to be exploited. So I also don't, I'm also very mindful because I do believe in you can produce it anywhere as long as it's produced well, right? And
Exactly. Yeah.
you're directly involved in the makers and the process and making sure that they align with the values that you would expect producing it in your own home country, right?
Mhm.
So but for us, we also have proprietary patents on our products. And for me, it just felt a lot better to start the process internally. Making bras is really challenging. A lot of people don't like to take that on. So you'll see that the majority of bras on the market today, they're all like this stretchy fabric, usually sporty, kind of spin on one machine. It's not anything like that has like multiple pieces. Traditional bra making is like 22 to 30 pieces, sourcing from many different places, multiple steps to sew it, multiple machines. It's a
Mhm.
specialized skill. A lot of people don't want to take on that work as well, right? So
Right.
that was something we had to consider because we didn't want to start off with these large minimums, like these huge commitments. I wanted to be able to start the process and see how it goes. And I'm so glad I did that because over the years, our brand has changed based on the information from our consumer. And our customer is actually one third never had children. One third had children a minimum of 10 years ago. We're really servicing a lot of women in the menopause space right now. And then the mothers who I thought I would be able to serve, the majority of them, to your point, until they have the baby, they don't really realize how important it is to take care of themselves. So that
Mhm.
customer shifted to like the second time or the after they had the baby mom, not somebody preparing for their first pregnancy. So that's primarily how we shifted into that. And then the fabrication, I make sure that I mill everything from scratch. I'm really involved in the process. I think a lot of people are learning a lot more about what fabrics do to your body now, and they're more mindful of that. Fabrics are, skin is our largest organ. It
Right.
consumes just as much as when we're eating. Things we put on our body, we're so mindful when we're pregnant, but then what happens when the baby comes out? Then we're like kind of back to the same routine. And we want to shift that thinking to understand like there's a lot of proof that showing these fabrics and things that are happening are affecting women's health. They're affecting their hormones, they're affecting their fertility.
Mhm.
So that's how we kind of moved into making sure that we were really well rounded in offering what we're doing.
It's so good. What in when you like started to navigate also the different materials and stuff, was that just feedback or was that also like so when I look at our journey specifically, I'm like everything is in steps, right? It's like, okay, I'm so happy we're here today, but man, we did this first and then we learned from this and then we grew from this. So on the material, was that again just feedback or was that again something you had already wanted to navigate into? And I'd be curious the different materials that you're using because even for us, we work with a lot of natural wool. And one of the brands under our company is a saddle blanket brand. And I always talk about like how natural wool is so good for your horse besides the synthetics that are being used. So it's same concept except for humans, of course. But I get, definitely get the idea of like, I mean, yeah, we want to make sure the material that's against our skin is healthy altogether. So would be curious of that journey just because I could geek out all day on supply and
Yeah.
sourcing and materials. So yeah, just out of curiosity.
Yeah, well, for sure, the cotton piece definitely came from my healing. because there's
Mm,
nothing else that I could wear, right? Like I'm breastfeeding and I got to figure out, okay, I'm trying not to get an infection.
right.
And that's just like a no-brainer, right? Because infection grows in moisture and bacteria that starts to grow out of fabrics. And we can kind of tell what type of fabrics
Mm,
retain a lot of bacteria. So that was priority for me. I always lined everything with cotton. I learned more about organic cotton as time went on, and then I shifted into that.
mm,
As for the lace, I knew that I didn't know as much as I know now. Now I mill everything from scratch and I know exactly what to say, like, remove this, do this, please. Like, I'll pay a
yeah.
premium. I don't care. Like, I want all the lace to be recycled yarn because lace is still synthetic. Like, at the end of the day, it's still a
Hmm.
fabric. We're not, nobody's there milling, like, sewing by hand with cotton to make like those days. That's more like bridal and very,
Yeah.
and our lace has to perform because you have to be able to pull it down multiple times a day. So there is a performance element to it that you'd see a lot in sporting apparel. But there are ways around it. But when I first started, I didn't know anything. I was just like, I really want to make sure that the lace is very strong and that it's good quality.
Hmm.
And now that I'm way further along, I'm like, okay, remove this. I don't want this chemical in it. I don't want that because I'm more aware.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I like the evolution. And I always encourage people that in a journey, right, to just begin because it's like when we look at the wealth of knowledge that we have, it's either from mistakes or it's from finding out something we didn't like, or it's from asking and just continuing to have that curiosity and continuing to learn. So, um, yeah, that's so good. I want to not circle back to a conversation we had off the mic several months ago, but and I believe you talked about just like the bra specifically that you have technology that people can that it's made for them, specifically for them. Can you talk about that? Because I think my face was like this the whole time you were like sharing that to me. I was like, really? Tell me more. Because I am not blessed with being full. This like full
Either mine. I
but so
know.
that is not a problem I don't have, but I do have a problem with again, like the fitting of my bra and like what that looks like. And especially it was so interesting being going through pregnancy to breastfeeding and all of that and just the amount of changes that your body goes through specifically when feeding because I was like I don't even know what to do with these right now. Like,
Yeah.
it's just yeah, it's fascinating. I think our bodies are so beautiful and so unique. But yeah, I would love for you to talk towards that technology because I thought that was super interesting.
Yeah, so I had created the bra based off of my own personal experience, which a lot of people do. They end up pulling the bra down sometimes, like they give up on their nursing bra and they're like, I can't deal with this anymore. I'm just going to go back to my regular bra or I'm going to buy something temporary and I'm just going to pull it down. But the issue with that is over time, the support wanes, the structure of the bra starts to fall apart. Like you'll notice that the fabric isn't as resilient, the straps keep falling off. Like it's just a huge problem, right? So that's when I kind of went into the whole space of kind of learning how to figure out, I'm like, well, a lot of people seem to do this. And a lot of people feel the same way. Why has bras not changed in 30, 40, 50 years? This is something that needs to be addressed because women are wearing bras all the time and we're just wearing what we were given. Like we feel like we don't have a say in the matter. We just got to figure out what fits us best based on what we need. And usually it's for a special occasion. Like when people are buying bras, they're
Yeah.
like, this wedding, I got this dress I got to wear, or I'm breastfeeding. Now I got to get a breastfeeding bra. But it's not like, oh, let's go bra shopping. Like I think that's like people hate bra shopping the most whenever we talk to people. So that's how everything kind of came together was just like first the function. And then the second thing was the fabrication of it. So going back to the fabrics, like another thing was I really loved wearing lace before I had my baby. But then after I found my skin got really sensitive and it was really itchy. And then we move it back to the conversation of like, I didn't know that they put a chemical in the lace so that it holds up better in the washing machine. So
Mm,
that's what makes people itch. And I'm like, oh, remove that. Like, I'm going to tell
yeah.
people how to wash their bras. I'm just going to like equate it to like your wedding dress. Would you put that in the washing machine? No, you
Hmm.
wouldn't, right? Like, would you do that if you had a wedding dress? Right. So it's just like the concept of it. That's how it all came together. And so then over time, as we evolved, we started realizing, there's something really magical that we do here that we were just doing naturally. So we started measuring people, getting all their measurements before we just sold them what they believe their size was. And most people don't know what their size was. And it is, and not because it's their fault. It's like genes, right? Like you say I'm a 28 or a 34 or a 42 in a jeans. And then you go to another brand and no, you're not. Like, okay, so
Yep.
it's not regulated sizing. So I always like to remeasure from scratch. And then since we make everything here, we work within like the framework of what we've already created. So our bras are not entirely custom, but the experience is custom, I would say. And we've managed to kind of figure out this magical way to make this one, like our pattern specifically fit multiple people. And then we also have true to size bras, but that kind of opened the door for other things. So we take that same pattern and we move it into like a bodysuit or a sleepwear, and it fits in a similar construction. So it's very soft and comfortable, but it still offers support. And yeah, it's just really interesting. Like I said, I have women coming to us that have a mastectomy that wear our bra. Like that's not what it was made for initially, but because it's easier. And now, like I said, we're seeing a lot of women in menopause. And the other thing is the way our bras are designed, they're designed to stretch with your breasts over time, right? Because when we're breastfeeding, like we have these, I can tell who has a favorite side and I can tell what side is their favorite. But the same thing starts happening when you're in menopause, which is so interesting. And some
That
people,
is interesting.
yeah, some people actually have that on a monthly cycle basis, right? Some people have more sensitive breasts every time they have their period. So, all of that is accounted for in the bra.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So in this whole journey, how long has it been around, Mayana? Is it Mayana? Yeah.
Yeah, it's been around for 13 years. I
Awesome.
would say 13 because it took me 3 years to develop the bra. And during
Yes.
the time, you can't really talk about it when you're getting a patent.
Yeah.
So
And you can't take out those years. That's hard work. Those are hard work years.
yeah, I feel like that when people say, oh, I've been married for 10 years, but you were dating for 20. Like, no, don't do that. Like, give yourself the full, you know what I mean? Like, yeah,
Exactly.
I feel like that about the brand. And we've been producing locally for 8 years in our space.
That's
Um,
awesome.
yeah. So, yeah,
What
it's
do you
been,
think is the most like as of today, the biggest thing or like that you're most proud of that you've accomplished? And then um I have so many little questions, but yes, that you've accomplished.
I think for sure it's the community that we've built. I see it now. It took a long time before it felt like really crickety, like, is anybody
Mhm.
listening? Anybody out there? But now, like, we get these beautiful messages from people. People be like, "Oh, I've been waiting to get a bra from you for like a year." Like, what is it? Why does it take so like, like it's just such a special moment for people.
Right.
Or when people come in and they say, like, I came in here because of your values. I love what you talk about online, and I love that you're doing this. Like, it really resonates with me. I think sometimes people think that like running a social business, it's not, it doesn't make sense. Like you should,
Right.
so many people are just like, oh, why are you talking about that? You should be neutral, or you should kind of just be for everybody. But if you do that, then you're competing with all the bigger box stores that can literally just rip you off and drive the price down. You're not really creating this
Yeah.
beautiful, well-rounded community that honestly, what's the point of starting your own business anyways, right? It's like the
Exactly.
point of starting your own business is to really follow what you believe in, or else you would be working for someone else.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. How
I
many
think
people do y'all have on your team?
there's four of us.
Okay.
There's three of us in here full time. And then I have quite a few people that just kind of come in and out of the business and support it from an advisory
Yeah.
perspective, or like they come in and they just do like once in a while this, that. We don't need them here full time, but yeah,
I love it.
mighty team.
Share. Yeah. Yeah. You can say hi to them. Uh, I, when people ask me, they're like, oh my gosh, like you do this, this, and this. And I'm like, yeah, but that's because we have a great and amazing team behind us. So we might be the face and get to share all the goodness, but there's so many people that, are surrounding the, that impact to be had. And so that is, um, for you guys listening, Nadine and I met through Corrales, which is a formerly CEO and a great, just kind of, I don't know, what are we part of? Kind of like a little
Women,
cohort
I would
thing.
say a women entrepreneurship hub to
Yeah.
support each other in community, right?
Yeah. So we decided we were going to try to be more intentional with it this year
Yes,
and
I
like
know.
really connect.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes these hubs can get overwhelming because there's like so much goodness, so much information. It's just like all thrown at you. But I was really, really happy we got thrown into a small group together and got to meet and just got to hear a little bit more about what you're doing. I talk a lot about sustainability and social impact on a global scale and on an artisan's based scale, just in the worlds that I'm in. So I love for people to also understand that this can happen in the US, in Canada, and right there. It doesn't have to be overseas, like because you mentioned this, kind of go back to what you were talking in the beginning. You mentioned that, yeah, you as long as your values are right, and fair trade is happening and ethical practices are occurring, this can happen anywhere in the world.
Yes.
But I love to see you doing it right out of Canada because in some senses it's almost harder in the amount of money that it costs to do to
Yeah.
like it's just a whole nother game. And so I just want to encourage the listeners who might not be connected to an artisan space or globally and they want to do it right where they're at in the Western world, like it's very much possible for you to do it. You just have to ask harder questions. And yeah, it's going to take a little bit, probably more effort, 3 years of not talking about it and
Yeah.
producing it like you did. But I think it's so encouraging to see people that it can happen also in any sector, right? It just doesn't have to be like in jewelry, like we see. It can happen in anything. And so you're truly, truly paving a beautiful way, especially in the intimate space and for women. And I love that you support both from the front end and in the menopause, like across the way of our journey as women. I think that's really, really unique.
Yeah. Thank you. It definitely, what I started off as is not what we are today. And I would encourage people to be flexible on those things, like be flexible on listening to your customer because you just don't know, it's opened up a lot more doors for us that we didn't even anticipate, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So tell people a little bit of how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you, how they can purchase, and we'll make sure all of this is in the show notes for our listeners, but I would love for them to find you.
Yes, amazing. So I'd say Instagram is the best place to find us. We're on there all the time. We're pretty vocal on Insta, and you can see like the different things that we're doing and the people that we're working with. And we show you behind the scenes, not as often as we need to, because we forget when we're in our space. We're like, oh, is that interesting? People want to see that. And all my like anybody that comes in, they're like, yes, we want to see what goes on. So that's the best way. Our website, definitely. And if anybody's interested, we always do like a concierge personal shopping experience. So whether you purchase
Oh, that's
beforehand,
awesome.
yeah, we will always double check with you after the fact, or you can book an appointment online. And we got really good at virtual fittings during COVID. So we have that down pat. So you don't have to worry about that. And we're big believers in measuring twice, cutting once. So that's why we do the double checking.
That's so good. So we'll make sure all that's linked. And then, as we always in the podcast, I love to leave our listeners with one last thing to live by. So, a little bit of inspiration to take them throughout this week. So, Nadine, what is one last thing to live by?
I think definitely stick to your values. I think that if you stick to your values and you really, really double down and believe in what you're doing, when things are really challenging and times are really tough, it's like your vision, your passion, what you believe in is what is going to get you through it. If you start a business just to make money, you will be very frustrated because business is a roller coaster. It's an emotional roller coaster. It is like, it can take a lot out of people, especially women. And because we're faced with so much more barriers. But if you are doing something that you believe in, for example, like with our mission, we're like, oh, we definitely need to dismantle this. Like we have to focus on making sure that women can be seen in other body types, not just one body type on social. We should be able to have these kinds of conversations around menopause, around pelvic floor health, without people feeling uncomfortable or ashamed or embarrassed. And we should also have men on board talking about this too. So this is not like a taboo conversation. So that's what keeps us going. When people write into us, we can have like the worst days and be like, oh my God, I love this brand. You all are so good. We're like, oh, that's that kind of what that's what keeps us going. And I think when you are focused on that, then you're able to be like, okay, today wasn't the best day potentially from like a business perspective, but from an impact perspective, it was fantastic.
So good. So lead with your values, everyone. And thank you again for coming onto the Moxie podcast.
Thank you for having
It's
me.
always a joy to have new friends join our community. So thank you. And for all of those listening, as always, Moxie on.